Okay, thank you. I may get an anxiety attack because being a physicist, I have to get the, right on the blackboard. There isn't one there. They even had one in Zurich. So, because I like to draw. At some point, I have to draw a triangle on the board. So, if I start off by telling the anecdote, it may be a completely different talk. So, but I'll do it anyway. I find when I go to a place to give a talk somewhere, I like some sort of message to come across, and like either a dream or something. In fact, one came through. I was here for this morning. I had the morning talk, and I went back and had a sleep, and something did actually come through just a few minutes before I left to come here. Maybe I'll tell you at the end. It was interesting. But in Zurich, I had to give a talk at the 50th anniversary of the Young Institute, and I went there because I'd first seen... Is the sound working? Oh, okay. Because I first saw Carl Jung on the John Freeman interviews the BBC had done, being very impressed when I was a student, and that sort of stayed with me through a lot of my life and led me to want to try and understand things like synchronicity at the time. And so when I got to Zurich, I thought, oh, gee, Jung used to be here, and I love that anecdote of he had a patient, and the patient was so boring in the end, Jung got up and went down to the lake and got on his sailboat. And the patient pursued him and said, "Now, why did you go out of the session?" And Jung said, "Because you're boring." I thought that was so wonderful and honest. And so I sat down by the lake, and I really wanted to get in touch with the spirit of Carl Jung, and absolutely nothing happened. There was nothing happened, no feeling, no sensation of Carl Jung at all. So I checked in the hotel. I thought, I'll go back to my room. And when I went to the room, it should have been on the floor with the numbers 300. Because, going up a series of stairs. And when I looked at the key, it was 237, which probably means nothing to you. But 237, 1 over 237, is a fine structure constant in physics. And it was a thing that Wolfgang Pauli had been very puzzled over all his life. Why did the good Lord make this number? You see, the numbers in the universe could be enormous, like, a 10 with 43 zeros after it, or incredibly tiny, like the size of the electron. But why this number, which is a very human-sized number? Why is one of the fundamental constants of nature this size? And when Pauli was ill and taken to hospital, he said to his assistant, "Ferez, what room am I in?" And Ferez looked at the door and says, "Room 237. And Pauli said, "Now I know I'll never leave." And he died. He died in that room a few days later. And that was a time when he was grappling between what he called God and the devil, between symmetry and anti-symmetry. He symbolized them in those ways. So I told this anecdote when I started the story at Zurich. An old man in the back started laughing. And afterwards, he left at the end, and I didn't get to speak to him. I said, "Who was that?" And they said, "Oh, didn't you know who that was? That was Pauli's last assistant." And that was the man I told the story about. So the strange thing was I went to Zurich hoping to get in touch with Carl Jung and didn't. I got in touch with Pauli. And which reminds me, just before he died, I met Michael Tippett. I spent a wonderful, I just said, I was one of the people in my life who wanted to talk to Michael Tippett, and he phoned up and he said, "Oh, come over." And his assistant said, he's quite ill now. You can only see him for an hour. But the fact is, he opened a bottle of wine and spent the whole afternoon there. And he told me with music that when he composed music, you have to evoke the gods. The gods come to you, you have to evoke them. But the thing is, you don't know who you're going to get. And he said that quite seriously. That, in fact, with the notion of that you don't know whether what you invoke is going to be good or bad, if it could destroy you. Or, in his case, it had been lucky. And another very sad thing he told me, that he said, like a few months ago, it ended. It left me. I'll never be able to compose again. So this God that he could invoke throughout his life, right until his 90th year when he was still writing, it just left. It couldn't be invoked again. So this title, I'm already partway into the talk. The title of the talk is The Return of the Sacred. And it's sort of a bit of trepidation. It seemed a good idea to talk about it at the time, but the closer I got to today, the more worried I was about the talk. And first of all, I can't integrate it. I can't symbolize it. It's in fact a triangle. It's a three-part talk. I want to talk about looking to the Millennium made me want to look into the past, like my own personal past and the past of how we got here. So it's partly looking at the past, partly looking at the indigenous peoples, and partly looking at physics, because physics is somehow a great deal of the way we look at the world today. I mean, we borrow a lot of the metaphors. The way the world looks, the way the world feels, the way what it's made out of, comes a lot from science and technology. In that sense, that that maybe I have an intuition or feeling that there is a sense of a return to the sacred within this, and I'm going to look at it in terms of physics at the end. And when I went back and lay down on the bed, I started to drift to sleep, and a voice suddenly said to me, "Don't spend too long at the well, keep moving." So that was a message given to me. And I thought of the well, I thought of the well where, in the Bible, that parable of people taking the water, the sacred water out of the well. So it said, don't spend too long at the well. So that was a caution to me. Like, don't get too hung up on this idea of the sacred. I'll start off by mentioning the Inuit people, the Eskimos. They don't have a word for art. I was at a conference of anthropologists who were talking about dating and discussing Inuit art, and somebody from the back stood up and says, "Well, I'm an Inuit. I can tell you we don't have a word for art. We don't have any artists, and we don't have any art." So that's a society where people carve whalebone and tusks of walrus tusks. They carve, they decorate, they make these beautiful parkas. They don't have any artists, and they don't have any art. They have no concept of it, no word for it. They just make things to fit the hand. They make things that fit. They make things that are decorative. The Mohawks are a different sort of people. They're not hunter-gatherers, they're farmers. They live in the eastern woodlands, and they have many traditions. They have a game that is played between the men and the women to see who plants the corn each year. When the first thunder is heard, somebody is always in the reservation waiting to hear the first thunder to offer sacred tobacco because the thunderbirds are appearing. Right through the season, there are a series of ceremonies that must be carried out. There's a series of feasts, and there are a series of prayers with the sacred pipe. And I once was talking in a house with an elder, and I used the word religion. He said, no, we don't have any religion. Religion is something that the white man brought. We don't have religion. And I said, well, could I say spirituality? No, you can't use that word either. So I said, well, what word, how would you describe the ceremonies, the offering the tobacco? What would you say? He said, our traditional ways. And I tried it out with a couple more elders. I mean, I was really struggling with this. What do you call this thing that we're praying and being together? And he said, it's a traditional way. Or you could say it's the way we do things. So, okay, you have many indigenous groups that don't have any art and don't have any artists. And now, apparently, there's groups of people that don't have any spirituality or any religion. They just have ways of doing things. And the other group is a big group that stretches from the Cheyenne. They're the Algonquin speakers, from the Cheyenne, the Blackfoot, the Ojibwe, right up to Labrador, where you have the Naskapi. And the Naskapi are probably one of the last hunter-gatherer groups left in North America. I mean, they really spend a good part of their lives hunting caribou, and then the rest of the time they come back to have reservations. The Canadian government supplied them with like prefabricated housing, because they used to live in igloos, and they do something neat. They put the skidoos in the prefabricated houses, and they use it for slaughtering the meat. And a lot of them still like to live in the igloos, but they've been provided with these very nice garages and deep freezers by the Canadian government. I have a very good friend who hunts with them for many years, and he said, I asked him about the concept of God or the Great Spirit. He said they really don't have that. They have no God. And I tried this talking to, when you talk to other people like the Blackfoot and everything else, of course, you realize that they've been exposed to missionaries for a long time. But more or less, they would say, as the speaker said this morning, they don't have any God, or it's something they would never talk about. So there you have people who don't have any art, who don't have any spirituality, who don't have any religion, who don't have any God, but have ways of doing things. And what are the ways of doing things? Well, one of them is this sense of acknowledgement. A lot of native groups say, all my relations. There's a litany that happens when when I've been in teepees when people pray, and it will begin by talking about the relations, the two-legged, the four-legged, the sky beings, the earth beings. It's a litany that goes on and establishes your relationship to all things, all living things. Living things including trees and rocks and the water and the sky, everything being alive. So it's a set of acknowledgements. And they talk about in the old times there were sets of compacts made or relationships made with the powers or spirits or energies. Energies is the word they feel most comfortable with. The energies of the universe. This set of relationships was established. And it's important to renew this constantly. And the whole year is marked with a series of ceremonies. Depending on where you are, there will be different ceremonies. I mean, I'm not an anthropologist. This is just talking to elders and what they've told me. So part of it is establishing and maintaining a relationship with reality. And this is the other big thing. It's easy to fall in the trap. And again, the word New Age was mentioned this morning. The New Age, you want to take psychedelics, or you do holotropic breathing, or you get in touch with your spirit animal or your favorite color or whatever, and you go into an extended reality. Now, I've talked to Native Americans about that, and they said there isn't any extended reality, there's just reality. But they say about themselves, we have very weak minds, and you white people have very hard, rigid minds. So what you see is only a little part of reality. Your minds are blocked to a wider reality. You can't talk to trees, and you don't know which rocks are alive, which rocks are dead. So it's that sense that it isn't the notion of an extended reality or a wider reality, it is just reality. And that maybe our sense of reality is rather diminished by our social conditioning, and particularly by the language we speak, which is a very noun-based language, and this is a thing that physicists have pointed out in regards to quantum mechanics. We're very, as Niels Bohr said, we're suspended in language. We don't know which way is up and which is down. That was Bohr, not Wittgenstein. But somehow the language we speak, the Western languages are very much object-related, concept-related. So it's difficult for us to appreciate a world like the world of a Blackfoot or Cheyenne or Ojibwe, which is a process-based world, a world of flow. So part of it is that sense of acknowledging reality at all levels and maintaining a relationship with it, which you believe the ancestors first struck, which contains obligations. So it's a set of obligations, it's the idea of a balance, it's the idea of having to repeat these ceremonies of renewal to bring you constantly back into relationship with reality, with energy, or whatever you want to call it. And I remember reading a story in Turnbull's book called The Forest People. This is to do with the people, you would call it pygmies in Africa, and how these people have a musical instrument that they blow at night, and it makes sounds that keep the forest happy. And they say that we have to do this to keep the forest happy. And if we keep the forest happy, the forest remembers us. And if we didn't do it, maybe the forest would go to sleep and forget about all the creatures. And I told this story to a Blackfoot elder, and his interpretation was immediately said, oh yes, I understand that. What they were saying was that the ant knows what to do and the bird knows what to do, and the forest people knew what they had to do. And that what we all have to know as people, as the two-leggeds on earth, is what we have to do within the land that we live. You're required to do something. So it was discovering like a set of obligations. So that is really the little bit about looking back to the time I was in Canada and learning a lot from the Native Americans I talked to, was that sense that if you were to talk about the return of the sacred, it would be a sense of renewal of something that's always been present throughout history and throughout the appearance of whoever it was who first appeared on the land, like Raven or Coyote or Buffalo Woman, and to keep renewing that there was an obligation to renew. And then from there I moved to near to Siena, and in a little mountain village, a little hilltop village of 200 people in Italy. And I want to beat that the next one, because I'm going to end up with physics if I've got time. And I wouldn't say I moved there for any reason, but looking back, I can see maybe I did want to move there because I wanted to find out what happened before the Renaissance, what happened before everything changed, what was life like that obviously the way the Native Americans I met lived is like probably most of the world lives that way, outside the industrial nations. And what was it like before? Well, the village I live in, there's a map of 1220, and it shows the houses exactly as they are today, and many of the names are the same family names as in 1220. And now the village has changed a bit because it used to house 1,000 people, now it's only 200, and men went down and bought wives from the south and brought them back. So sort of, I suppose genetically it's a little bit different, but in many ways it remains the same. There are still the shrines where the roads meet and cross, and the whole year is marked with a whole series of ceremonies, a series of eating together in the summer outside or indoors at long tables. St. Blaise, San Biagio, we've had the Immaculate Conception, Carnivale. There's the Vendemmia when the grapes are picked and the wine's made. There's picking the olives. There's the time of the appearance of the fireflies. There's a whole series of times measured throughout this. There's markers in time throughout the year, this cycle of the year. And my sort of fantasy is that maybe that's how people always lived up to the early Middle Ages, with a series of markers and a series of celebrations. And I more and more, and I've gone back and talked to a few native people and tried to compare, and gee, it's so similar. One of the things you have to do in this village is do the geo. You have to walk around the village every day just to gossip to people. The Mi'kmaq say, well, that's what our obligation is. That's our most important work, is gossip. The gossip is what holds the village together. It's exchanging information. It's being seen to be there and going around cementing. So, looking into a little bit of history, you see that really probably Europe up to the early Middle Ages was very like that we lived in a space and time that was very, very rich, in which was full of meaning. And then round about the time of that map was made, 1220, but by, well, I don't know what it would be, 1280 or 1340, somewhere around that, things changed. The first clocks appeared on public buildings. Time started to become secularized. People began to keep records of business practices. People invented double-entry bookkeeping. I mean, this is all sort of history, but what I saw was that consciousness, there were some very, very, very powerful tools given to the human consciousness, probably more revolutionary than the internet and the PC. That's my feeling, and I've been thinking about it over the last year because I'm going to write a book about this. But my feeling is that these tools were more revolutionary than probably the PC and the internet. These tools were the secularization of time, the measure of time, freeing time from the cycle of the day and the church's cycle, making it abstract, abstracting time, allowing usury to take place. Like in Siena, we got the bank, one of the very oldest banks in the world, Monte dei Paschi Bank, which was founded by a saint. I mean, it's a good, your money's safe if it's bank founded by a saint. Now, this was neat, you see, there was no usury, so he says, okay, I'll give you some money now. You give me the money back in a year's time, and if you like, you can give me a gift. So that sense that money and time became equated, so now everything time's money, you put time aside, you buy time, you lose time, you waste time. The notion of time being taken away from the sacred, from that image in Dante, the circles, time being freed from that and being made secular, and there being tools of the mind to enable you to follow the way money grows, the way goods grow, to follow, to predict the future, to begin to control things. The idea of bookkeeping, the development of perspective in the Renaissance, giving this idea that somehow we were able to create an abstract world in the mind and manipulate it, that we didn't sort of live in the heart of the natural world as other people did, that somehow we began to abstract the world, to make mental models of it, and to manipulate those models. And by the Renaissance, of course, it's all fallen into place. You can do all these things. And somehow the immanence of the world, I don't know, that was my feeling. Did the immanence of the world begin to fade the more we developed that ability with these remarkable tools of the mind to abstract? The development of Indo-Arabic number systems enabled people to make complicated calculations. All those things happened around about the same time. Bookkeeping, map making, Arabic numerals, clocks, accurate clocks, that have no relationship to the rest of the world. I mean, up to that point, time was measured by natural processes. Now it's measured by a clock. And then the next metaphor is, well, the whole solar system has to become a clock. Somehow the clock becomes a metaphor for everything, the clockwork. So I can see in that the sense of being able to abstract the world, hold it in the mind, manipulate it. It's incredible, powerful tool that developed in Europe and enabled Europeans to fully fledged have a science, develop science, Western science. It came from that ability to abstract, to make models, to objectify the world and treat it as an object, treat it as something that could be, the idea of the theoria, it's like a theatre. It's a theatre of the mind. You can play the world in the mind abstractly, and it gave rise to science, and science, that notion that we somehow objectify. The science gave you a value for a objective vision of the world. That somehow the universe was described by Platonic laws, these laws that somehow existed outside space and time. It's very curious, the idea of laws in physics. It all puzzles me. I mean, they sort of have a Platonic quality about them. They exist prior to matter, prior to space, prior to time. The idea of prediction and control, all of this has been much talked about. But by the end of the 19th century, what physics had got, what science had got. There's a little conference of artists and scientists next week at the October Gallery, and somebody sent me a really nice little email about it, and he said, please ask all the physicists present to take a blood oath that they won't act as the prefects of the universe. And I thought, what a wonderful image, that we're physicists are the prefects of the universe. And they're also the prefects that's always sucking up to the headmaster. And you notice that, like Einstein, the good Lord was not played dice with the universe, and the good Lord did this, and the good Lord. So they really, as the speaker this morning said, like the gods remarkably always speaks in the same voice as the speaker. And the good Lord really made the universe the best way possible. And, we were told God is a mathematician. So we had that 19th, early 20th century vision of a universe made by a mathematician in a most elegant way possible, using the most elegant and beautiful laws, which was a sort of value-free universe, an objective universe, something, again, could be played with by the models of the mind. And I saw this in a sense of, as a sort of, almost as if physics had got through to a sort of psychic inflation. It really, you can still see it today when amazing statements are made. Like Carl Sagan said that at last children throughout the world can be taught the one truth about the creation. So, no matter what culture you come from, you have a myth and there's one truth, which is the one the physicists say. So Carl Sagan can make a statement like this. Stephen Hawking can end his book by talking about the mind of God. Paul Davies can win an enormous prize for writing a book called God and the New Physics. So there's that sense in which physicists really, I think the physics community as a whole is guilty of this sort of inflation, that it's really hand in hand with God, explaining God to the rest of us, because God, uses pure mathematics and a very simple form of logic. It's really, right, God's rather dumb, actually, to create a universe that way. I remember I got a series of emails from somebody that call themselves, I couldn't figure out what the place was, but they said, we want to fly you over and put you up in the Holiday Inn. Holiday Inn's a very bad place because they do firewalking in the Holiday Inn, and you can do weekend vision quests at the Holiday Inn in the States. Anyway, they said, we'll fly you up, we'll put you up, we'll offer you a lot of money. And I said, well, who are you? They said, we can't tell you till you come. And in the end, they said, well, we're the Ascended Masters. And I said, well, who are you? He said, well, we've got direct messages for you from David Bohm. I used to work with David Bohm. You have some messages from David Bohm, who's dead. And I said, well, just send the messages on there. They were really, really dumb, stupid bits of physics that Bohm was working on after he was dead. So maybe there's a part of heaven that all the physicists go to when they're dead, And there's a guy dresses up with a beard, and he has a big calculator, and they all think, my God, we've reached God, and he's going to tell us all the secrets now. And they just play away for eternity doing that. Maybe there's another one for poets, which is just as dull. So, you can't let the poets win. So So why would I think, given all of this, and this rather circuitous talk, why would I talk about the return of the sacred? Because I think this physics has been touched by a sort of hubris, and one of them is the idea of chaos. I mean, the chaos theory came about rather miraculously, that we had Newton's laws of motion that described the moon around the Earth, or the sun, or the Earth around the sun. And Newton's laws, well tested, and the mathematics could only be applied to two bodies. It was too difficult to work it out for 3 or 4 or more bodies. And as you know, the solar system contains many planets, moons, and the sun. And at the end of the 19th century, it was a big drive was to try and demonstrate that this solar system was, in fact, that it was a rational system. It was the Newtonian clock. The Newtonian clock was, in fact, a rational system. It actually did work. And there was a thing called perturbation theory that people developed, which was to apply a series of approximations. But some mathematicians were a little worried that if you add up an infinite number of infinitesimal corrections, they don't necessarily, add up an infinite number of very tiny things. It could be a rather large number at the end. And in fact, it was Poincaré who, in the end, demonstrated that more or less the solar system is stable, and it is contained, but there are certain conditions under which it could behave chaotically. And that happened in 1900, that was discovered. And that's the same year as the discovery of the quantum. 1905 was relativity. So it was a result that was rather sort of put in the shadow by development of relativity and quantum theory. But then in the 50s and 60s, Russian mathematicians developed ways of dealing with differential equations, and computers came on the scene, and this whole new theory of chaos theory came about. And I see it as being a sort of hubris for science, that science was attempting to have ultimate control in a way, ultimate predictability. The notion of containing the whole clockwork of the solar system, and suddenly discovering at the center of that clockwork is a possibility of chaos. The other great theorem happened several decades later was Gödel's theorem. It showed that axiomatic systems are not complete, that you can create the most beautiful mathematics you want, but it's going to be essentially incomplete. There's going to be something missing from it. So there was, in a sense, in the desire of Russell and Whitehead and people like that to put the whole of mathematics on a strict logical foundation, that was discovered to be flawed. The idea of putting the whole solar system on a rational basis was discovered also. It's rational, but it's a possibility of chaos within it. And so chaos theory has really shown physicists that there is, one has to accept ignorance, one has to accept incompleteness, that cannot be a complete definitive story, a closure to things. The things are open. The big essence of chaos theory is this notion of open systems, openness, the idea that things self-organize, that maybe the laws of physics are not Platonic after all. It's possible. It opens the possibility that the laws of physics sort of appear along with matter. I think the other thing that I find very beautiful about chaos theory is the attention to the detail of the world. This is something we'd sort of rather forgotten. The attention to the individual. I mean, one of the things that always struck me very deeply was Gerard Manley Hopkins, this notion of inscape. And maybe, you see, chaos theory doesn't tell us anything new. It's just a fad, it's a fad. But I think the important thing is it's a shift in consciousness on the part of physics to have to acknowledge the limitations of incomplete knowledge, of the inability to have complete control and prediction over things, that physics has acknowledged a sort of something within its heart, a sort of an openness. And I think that's very healthy. And I think it opens the door to a lot of other things happening. And then when I think of Gerard Manley Hopkins, glory be to God for dapple things. The idea of the coupled coloured cow, the idea of individual things. Glory be to God for individuality, for particularity, for the inscape which is present in each piece of matter, each raindrop, each atom. I think it's a possibility physics could open up to that. So, I begin to wonder, well, what is the images that physicists are coming up with? Is it, is physics like of course it's not a rational system. Any physicist will tell you that. All physicists will tell you that that the idea comes to you. It's like a gift. You know, Poincaré, the famous story, Poincaré has been struggling for ages about theorem in mathematics, and he lifts his foot to step on the trolley car, and it hits him. Wolfgang Werner Heisenberg has been struggling with quantum mechanics. He knows the theory as it presently stands must be wrong. He's ill. He has hay fever. He goes to Heligoland and relaxes and starts to swim. And that night, the theory said it was like looking down a microscope. He suddenly saw into the heart of nature, and the theory appeared to him. And he wrote it down throughout the night, and in the morning he swam out to a rock. He'd never been able to swim that far. It's a great image. He couldn't reach this rock in the morning. He reached it and swam to it. So over and over again, you see that the theories of physics, they don't come rationally. They come through intuition, through insight. Ramanujan, the mathematician, the Indian mathematician, said the theorems arrived to him via the goddess, and he couldn't prove them. He was incapable of proof. He didn't really understand how to prove these theorems. I worked a little bit with David Bohm. David Bohm, the same thing. He would produce an idea, and he couldn't prove it, or if he did prove it, the proof is generally wrong, but the idea was right. So physics is not in that sense. It's something that occurs. It is, of course, it has to be backed up by rationality, by experiment, by observation, by reason, by a collective vision of the whole physics community. But the way these things arrive, it isn't that way. It comes through intuition, insight, hints, dreams. So then I wonder, well, maybe what are the things that physicists are dreaming? One of the things that really preoccupies them is the idea of the void. I think this is beautiful because over the last few years I've been talking a lot with artists. And some of the people I talk to the most are Anish Kapoor. I don't know if anybody knows Anish Kapoor's work, but Anish Kapoor is very much concerned with the void. He produces these beautiful pieces. Also talking about endarkenment. These pieces where you cannot find yourself, you can't place yourself in them. They're black, they're intense black or intense blue. There's no way of finding your presence in them. You are confronted with the void inside yourself. And he's termed that also endarkenment. The other artist I talk to a lot is Anthony Gormley. He talks about the inner space, the space rarely visited, the space that lies beyond good and evil but contains them both, the space that lies beyond dimension but contains dimension. So for Gormley and Kapoor, there is that sense of the sublime, of representing or giving the experience of the sublime. For Anish Kapoor, it's in a sense giving a representation of the sublime that you can stand in front of. With Anthony Gormley, it's more that in front of his sculptures you become aware inwardly of this sense of the space within. And this is one of the preoccupations of physics, the vacuum state, the ground state of the universe. It's something that's sort of still been around. It's been around for some decades now, this sense that, and you could call it the void, you could call it the silence out of which everything grows. It's this state which is in one sense a vacuum state. In one sense it's a total absence, in the other sense it's a total plenum. It contains all the energy, if you like, within 1 cubic centimetre of the whole universe. So it's an image, it's a very powerful image, I think. One is this image of chaos. The other is this image of the vacuum or the ground state, or I like to see it as the void. And to meditate on that void the same way as Anish Kapoor would, or John Cage would meditate upon silence, it's this sense that somehow physics has come up with this image of the void. It's also come up with another image called symmetry breaking. This sense that, the old sense that the universe was created in the most beautiful way possible. God was a mathematician. God was, it has to be the most elegant fundamental equation. Yet, the world as we know it is particular. It's individual. So there's this sense that these symmetries progressively break, that out of some sort of global, most fundamental symmetry in which everything is unified, one progressive the universe in time, making itself manifest in time, or the creative force descending into the manifest, progressively broke these symmetries until you end up with a world of particularity. So I think that's interesting too, the fact that there is this duality in physics between, on the one hand, the desire to make God a mathematician, the desire to have the most elegant and beautiful and simple equations. And on the other hand, this sense that all these symmetries ultimately must be broken. One must go to the particular, to the individual, to the fact that the elementary particles all have very different masses, or to the notions in chaos theory, similar notions. This isn't a physics talk, it's more just wondering about what are some of the images that physicists are beginning to evoke in their own work. And there's other curiosity. This is a sort of like a bit out of left field now, but I mean, there are people. There's been a lot of struggle to unify relativity and quantum mechanics, and it's not worked. And so people are out in really left field trying to feel what could be done. And some people are playing around with algebras. There's a group at Birkbeck College, and I also talked to Chris Isham, and he's working with sort of context-dependent logic. So it's a sense of introducing the observer, the human subject, back into the universe at a fundamental level. In one sense of the word, in one sense. So it's a context or a meaning-dependent logic. And it's curious that some of these logics were developed by a man called Grassmann in the last century. And Grassmann developed these logics, or these algebras, after studying, he was a mathematician who also studied Sanskrit. He wanted to try and develop a representation of human thought in mathematics. So he developed a sort of process mathematics. And that's, in a way, that sort of elements of that are present in the way people are trying to grapple with notions of space and times. And I suppose the other great thing that the physicists are playing around with is notions of consciousness and how that applies, theories of consciousness. So, if I call this talk the Return to the Sacred, what I suppose I see is when I went to this village in Italy in '94, which was a medieval village, where people behave in very traditional ways and really are more concerned with growing olives and wine and things like that. I thought, gee, and I had this strange feeling this is where the future is. This is what the future is going to be like. It's going to be like this. And then when I come back and look at physics, and I think it's curious some of the images that physicists are coming up with. That sort of, as I say, I've not been able yet to integrate this. I can't find a symbol for all of this. It's a sort of set of feelings or intuitions. And it's where my life's taken me over the last few years, talking to artists, talking to Jungians, talking to physicists, and trying to live this, trying to find a place for myself in the village where, like I said, with the forest people, they knew what their place was. It was to play the music. And I'm trying to find what sort of place I have in the village. And up to now, it's involved at the festas carrying the food to the tables. So I do have a certain, a little minimal level of function there, but there's no real function for a writer in a place like that. Maybe you could have some questions. If there are any.